man, I really appreciate how Sonic Mania took the series back to its roots. Yeah, for sure. The last time they tried, we got Sonic 4, and that was terrible. Still, it is surprising that ever since Sonic went 2D, they just abandoned the old formula. Sonic Advance is a game I would have hoped many of you have at least heard of. Releasing near the end of 2001, this was one of the first Sonic games to be hosted on a Nintendo platform, specifically the Game Boy Advance, which has some of the best collections of games to date, I might add. Sonic Advance is a 2D action platformer, much like the popular classic games such as Sonic 3. Due to being the first time many Nintendo players would have even played a Sonic game, you can see why Sega would have imagined having a more traditional Sonic game available could help attract new fans. As for me, Sonic Advance was one of my first games for the Game Boy. In truth, I don't remember much of my opinions from back then, but I know I enjoyed the game enough to at least beat the normal ending once. Oh, and of course, playing around in the tiny Chao garden. From what I can gather, Sonic Advance is the most respected of the trilogy amongst fans in the present day. The sequels will each try adding things to the formula that we are given in this game, so it could simply be that people believe those additions made the gameplay worse. Alternatively, it is also possible this opinion is held due to Advance 1 being the most played game in the trilogy. You see, one of the marvellous traditions of the Game Boy cartridges was to bundle multiple games together on one as a method of increasing sales. This is not like the combo package you see from Nintendo today, with releases like the Diamond and Pearl remakes costing the price of both games separately. Back then, the GBA combo cartridges were sold for the standard retail price. It really was a bargain. Sonic Advance had multiple combo releases, such as with a copy of Sonic Pinball Party. I've made enough references to this as is, but Sonic Advance is a GBA game. Being on a portable device, the developers needed to account for the reality that their game would be expected to cater playing with it on the go, rather than the stationary console experience. A result of this may have been the decision to make Sonic Advance follow the formula of the classic games. They have been proven to work for handhelds in the past, and are compartmentalized in their structure. Sonic Advance features 7 main zones, with most of them split into 2 acts. When starting a new game, you are first offered a choice between which character you wish to play as: Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, or Amy. Just like in the classics, these 4 share the same core mechanics, but each have their own small tweaks to make their experiences distinct. The combination of character choice and classic-styled zones was a fitting solution to making playing this game on the go more feasible. That said, Sonic Advance may have adhered to the classic formula a little too much in places. Despite the act zone structure being perfectly suited for incremental play, Sonic Advance provides no way for players to stop an ongoing playthrough. Your only option is to beat the game or just turn it off, same as the classics, which is pretty bad for on-the-go play. Now, thankfully, the game does still autosave your progress, so when you come back, you start from the last act you beat. However, it would have been nice to have an option to return the main menu without having to turn off the game. Being on a handheld device naturally meant that there were a limited amount of buttons the developers had to play with. Of course, Sonic started out with few buttons, so this was not a huge challenge. The true test was the screen size. There were numerous handheld Sonic games before, but they were either gimmicky playstyles or slow platforming. Sonic Advance allows and often encourages players to go fast, while still including level design for more traditional releases. As you may expect, the result is a somewhat contradictory experience where the game wants you to go fast, but the levels often will punish you for it with off-screen death pits or enemies that blindside you. The developers obviously would have been aware of this, and they even tried to help by placing rings to indicate what may be safe. I say may because the player is never told to trust the rings, and they aren't always supposed to guide you over unseeable hazards. The leaps of faith are something that Advance has been criticised for a lot, but the true issue is that the screen size simply wasn't properly designed around. As a result, it's not just leaps of faith, but enemies and level progression that also can become unintentionally frustrating. The game's presentation is not all bad, however. The sprite work is absolutely beautiful. Even if you've never played these games, I'm sure most of you have seen the style of sprite introduced by this game. Despite having to contend with the GBA's small screen, they're able to convey so much detail. All the characters adopt their adventure designs, which already were more detailed than the classics, yet the expressions and poses on display here are so varied and fluid. Advance has a very adventure-esque feel to it in general. Not only are the character designs based upon it, but the tiny animals you set free from robots are the same species you find in Adventure. Some of the enemies also are the same from Adventure, and even the first stage clearly has taken some inspiration from Emerald Coast. All the while though, Sonic Advance keeps the spirit of the classic formula it's based off, in the way it is designed. Stages have different paths, with the highest ones being more desirable. Special stages must be completed to gain Chaos Emeralds, stuff like that. This harmony between new and old was something the Adventure era was quite successful at, whilst the franchise naturally evolved past it in later stages. Having all these recognisable features helped keep a sense of progression and continuity in the franchise. It also helped make Sonic Advance feel related to the main series games. Tiny Chao Garden is a side mode where you can raise 2 Chao, but it's far more limited than the real deal. Sonic Advance allows you to transfer Chao between the Tiny Chao Garden and Sonic Adventure in order to both get rare Chao and take your Chao with you on the go. This was another element of synergy with the main games, as back then the Chao felt like a staple feature. But enough about all that, let's get into the content of the game, starting with the story. Yeah, Advance doesn't really have a story. Eggman is back, he's bad, and the gang need to stop him. That's really all there is, and that is fine. Bigger, more nuanced stories were already being handled by the console titles, and having long stretches of non-gameplay sections would be pretty counterproductive for a game that was supposed to be playable in bite-sized chunks. Let's go over the playable characters, starting with Sonic. At face value, he plays much like his classic counterpart. You can move about and gradually pick up speed, jumping into items and enemies alike. Spin dashing is back to activating through revving the jump button whilst crouched, and Sonic is able to roll just by tapping down with some speed. Instead of the homing attack, pressing A when jumping gives Sonic a brief damaging field, just like in Sonic 3. Unlike in the classic games, Sonic can press the B button to perform the SA2 combat roll. Admittedly, this is more of a novel inclusion than anything else, but it's a nice nod to that game. Besides, if you're trying to climb up a slope and can't generate enough speed, the combat roll moves Sonic at a set rate, so this can help. The reason slopes may prove a problem is due to Sonic Advance having a focus on momentum. The simulated physics are not quite the same as in the classics, it is best thought of as a weaker version. Sonic will need to have a certain amount of momentum to clear loops, make jumps, and climb slopes, but it decays quite fast. Sonic can also grind on a few select rails scattered around the stages. Again, it's more of a novelty, as he's the only one who can use them. Playing as Sonic through this game was perfectly doable. The stages were clearly designed around him first, and he is the base for all the characters. Unfortunately, his simplistic design does cause him to face a lot of hardship in the wake of Sonic Advance's screen issues, but also in aspects of its level design. Too often would the game try to encourage precise platforming that Sonic simply isn't equipped to deal with. Geometry on things like the springs has collision detection that doesn't add up with the visuals, and many ledges have invisible collisions beyond their sprites. Combine that with looking at a small screen, and the later stages can become a nightmare as Sonic, if you haven't gotten used to it. The trick is to play Sonic slowly, taking your time on platforming and never rushing ahead. But this is counter to all the dash panels the game throws at you. Not to mention, when you're playing as Sonic, you probably were hoping to have the fastest experience, not the slowest. I mostly played him fast, but I've played Sonic for years. It is a pretty disappointing design choice. Something I did not know prior to this playthrough was how there was a secret button command to play Sonic with Tails following you. Pressing down on Tails, left bumper on Knuckles, right bumper on Amy, and then selecting Sonic will summon Tails. He functions much like he did in Sonic 3, where he'll try to mirror your movements but will fly back to you if lost. Interestingly, this game seems to input your commands exactly, which allows you to manipulate Tails to cheese bosses and enemies. Since we are already on the subject, we may as well discuss Tails next. For the most part, he plays as you would expect, which is like Sonic. Instead of the combat roll, Tails will swipe with his tails, as he would in Sonic Adventure. Also, unlike the combat roll, Tail Swipe can actually be useful on occasion. It reaches decently far ahead of Tails and can be used to attack without risking damage to yourself thanks to the range. The downside is Tails halts to a standstill whilst using it, so you won't always find a good moment for it. Tails will fly when jumping in the air as you would expect, however in this game it feels even stronger than it did in the classic games. It felt like he could fly for quite a long time here. Whilst that is great for exploring levels or reaching higher paths, it also makes it quite easy to trivialise the platforming and stage hazards. In truth though, I don't mind that here. The level design's failings to account for screen size matter a lot less when you can just fly out and over of all your problems. Tails is very clearly the easy mode of this game, and for some people it is enough. He still has to contend with the levels, especially more enclosed ones, so it's not like Adventure where he could skip everything. Knuckles doesn't shake up the formula drastically, but that's not to say he was a waste. Rather than the tail swipe, Knuckles has a 1-2-3 punch combo. Due to how invincibility frames work, and how most foes die in one hit, the combo is a bit excessive. All 3 hits sadly do not have the perks of the tail swipe. You still must be stationary, however the range of the attacks means Knuckles is far more likely to collide into damage. Ironically, the best use for the punch is to quickly interact with something that a jump would take longer to do. Knuckles will glide when jumping in the air. In this game, the glide feels very satisfying to use for similar reasons to Tails' fly, but a bit more skillful on the player's end. I also like how Knuckles still destroys enemies during the landing animation, as I don't think he did in the classics. Despite only going down, gliding still lets the player explore thanks to climbing afterwards. If you are on your way down a bottomless pit, the climb may even save you. Ultimately, Knuckles is like Sonic, but with a faster B attack and a more useful aerial move. Oh, and a fun inclusion to this game is that Knuckles can swim on the surface of water, which I assume must be another Adventure nod. Now, Amy is pretty interesting. She is the only playstyle new to the classic formula, and they decided to take her in a unique direction. Rather than operating as a Sonic clone in the sense that she's built off of him like the others, Amy from the ground up is a separate character. Taking inspiration from her Sonic Adventure playstyle, Amy is all about using her hammer to keep the bad guys away from her. She can't spin dash or attack robots with her jump since she ties her quills down. Instead, when jumping you must time the swing of her hammer. If you miss or just don't, expect to take some damage. As for the spin dash, Amy just leaps forward. During the leap you can press jump again to slide tackle enemies, but Amy goes face first so you're then locked into a recovery animation. In addition to those, if you press down B, Amy will hammer vault much like she did in Sonic Adventure 1. This can be pretty handy at reaching areas Amy otherwise had no means of getting to. Of course, you could also just swing your hammer on the ground, which is good at keeping distance. Hitting springs with your hammer even doubles the launch distance. Finally, pressing down B in the air will cause Amy to do a hammer drop, which is an entirely new move. In practice, it works like a more traditional stomp, except once she hits an enemy, she'll rebound and can be positioned to combo for as long as you have a target. When you put all of these together in gameplay, Amy becomes a pretty standout character. She may not have the same skills as the others, but she has more moves, and mastering them can feel very rewarding. Amy is best considered the hard mode though, because she's vastly different whilst needing to complete the same levels. So those are the playable characters. After playing all of them, I have an order of preference which was not what I expected. The character I least enjoyed playing was Sonic. Blasphemy, I know, and it's not what I would have thought before coming back to the game either. The problem with Sonic, as I alluded to earlier, is that he plays the game so honestly that all of its dishonest features hit him the hardest. He doesn't have a way around, he just has to press on. In third is where I place Tails. It's not that he's bad to play, but basic. He really does just breeze through the game, which is great when you've already beaten it and are trying to get footage, but not so great if you're looking for a challenge. For inexperienced players, I wouldn't be surprised if he was number 1. Coming up just short in second is Amy. She certainly is challenging, but nothing too far from the normal experience. Sometimes you have to get creative in how you get past momentum-based platforming, other times you can get a lot of extra oomph with her hammer skills. Amy requires the most thought whilst playing and feels good to learn. Going into this, I assumed she would be number 1, but second is not so bad. Which means that knocking at first is Knuckles. The utility of his climbing really helps when it comes to exploring or reaching higher areas, as does the ability to swim over water should you wish. Then his glide lets you travel at a faster speed than fly, whilst knocking anything that would get in your way. Playing Knuckles gives you a real sense of forward momentum, like you can't be stopped. Ironically, Knuckles feels like the best character to go fast with in Sonic Advance. For those reasons, I rate Knuckles as the best character to play the game as. The game wouldn't be much without stages though. As I said, there are 7 main zones to play through, as well as a few extra ones. Your adventure begins in the Neo Green Hill Zone, a nice blend between adventure and classic aesthetics. As an introductory level, you won't find anything challenging as you run through, but you will be introduced to core concepts like momentum thanks to the level design. Both of its acts do a good job at clearly showing how a stage may have different routes. Following this is Secret Base Zone. The construction and industry theming high up at night is a really unique setting that we haven't really seen since. The zip lines, spotlights and music help make you feel as if you're a spy breaking into some illegal operation. As for the stage itself, we're introduced to some environmental puzzles and platforming. Unfortunately, I was already finding the screen size was making it difficult to anticipate where I could jump to at some spots. Ducking or looking up to shift the camera could help sometimes. Act 2 was more focused on platforming. However, at numerous points, some stage transitions would take you somewhere you didn't expect and were not telegraphed. That said, it was still easy to beat both acts. Next up was Casino Paradise Zone, because it wouldn't be a Sonic game without it. The casino features a bunch of staples with its bumpers and flippers, pinball style. There are numerous new contraptions to get lost in as well, and overall the stage has a nice classy vibe. Act 1 doesn't overdo the amount of pinball sections and is simple enough to get through. Act 2's paths were a little bit more chaotic, but ultimately still fine. Something I noticed was how a clown enemy type found here seems to be the basis for a similar opponent featured in Shadow the Hedgehog. Spinning into the ball simply bounces you away, an interesting enemy. After that was Ice Mountain Zone. This is where the game really starts trying to test you. The developers made the bold choice of having a stage that mixes a snow level with a water level. Some of the most hated platforming archetypes. In Act 1, the player may experience the first instance of punishment for falling to lower paths, which are coated in snow and limit movement. The higher paths instead have ice, which the enemies use to attack with momentum-based weaponry. The water sections were quite easy to navigate. Act 2, however, has an extensive water section, being the entire lower path. Not only that, but it is littered with baffling decisions. For example, there are ice elevators that you must stand on to push down whilst enemies dive attack you. Most characters can just rev a spin dash to kill them on contact, but if you're Amy, prepare for a slow and painful ride that probably ends with you drowning. Thankfully, this can all be avoided by sticking to the top route, but it's pretty rough regardless. Staying on the top route heavily relies on slowing down and watching for rings to guide your platforming. Angel Island Zone actually makes an appearance here, although it has quite a different look. If you aren't a fan of bottomless pits, then you probably won't be a fan of this stage, as it has plenty, most of which will claim the lives of anyone running through. Act 1 lets you avoid the bottomless pits much like Zone 4 before it by sticking to the top routes. Act 2 had less bottomless pits, but was harder to keep to the top. The whole zone was more platform focused than those previous stages. After this, we begin to enter the end game. Zone 6 is the Egg Rocket Zone. Unlike the others before it though, this zone consists of one long act. This was done to make the act harder to beat, and if you did game over, you would have to do it all over again. Egg Rocket has a great atmosphere. The sunset skies becoming periodically obscured as you hijack an Eggman missile into space feels pretty climactic, and the music grants it a more foreboding nature. Whilst you make your way through the missile, you will encounter newer and far more annoying enemies than before. The diamond ones especially, as they are immune to damage before they attack. To progress Egg Rocket, you'll have to beat a countdown timer by reaching a specific point of the stage. Once you do, the previous section breaks off as the rocket begins to leave the planet. On your way, you will alternate between running around on the inside and scaling the outside. Unfortunately, despite the appearance, this stage is pretty bad. For a start, the outside sections are filled with bottomless pits and leap of faith platforming. Additionally, this stage goes all in on the precision platforming angle that just doesn't work for this game. I got killed way too often due to characters not detecting springs correctly. Whilst it wasn't an issue before, Sonic Advance does like to set up automated sections with dash panels and springs that had hazards that will almost always hit you. A particular spring section was so tedious to navigate as it failed to consider the player's momentum and will normally just spike you. Honestly, this stage just feels like it wastes your time with cheap platforming, which is a shame for such a cool setting. Beating Egg Rocket takes you to Zone 7, Cosmic Angel Zone. A pretty imposing name for an Eggman base, but I have no idea where the correlation comes from. This technological labyrinth is far more active than the previous level. There are automated cannon sections, anti-gravity sections, bottomless pits, and atrocious enemy placement. There was a specific section where a spring launches you between a spike and a diamond robot. The window to get past is very tight as the robot will move in as soon as it comes into view and felt very cheap. When I came back to it as a character that could approach from a different angle, the robots didn't behave as planned and it wasn't a challenge at all. This stage has numerous annoying moments like that, but by my 4th playthrough, it also didn't take too long to beat. As a whole, I would say that the stages are good enough, especially if you're playing as either Tails or Knuckles. The further in you get, the more annoying the stages get. Obviously, you want the games to get harder, but in Advance, the difficulty rise is not always for good reasons. All of the zones end in boss fights against Dr. Eggman, as you may expect. Neo Green Hill Zone's boss is a simple affair of hitting and dodging a slow-moving target. All the characters do well against it, and you can really get away with abusing your invincibility after being hit to defeat the boss. Secret Base's boss also has a similar weakness. Its long jumps may catch players off guard, but again, you can just spam him after being hit to win. Casino Paradise Zone had a pretty bad boss fight. It is an interesting premise, with Eggman running through tunnels alongside a decoy, but the problem is that if he appears on the opposite side, you will be unlikely to catch up to him. Standing on the platform theoretically gives you the most time to react, but in practice it didn't always work out that way. As a result, this fight drags on for a bit. Amy seems to handle it best as she can hide in the middle and strike with her hammer safely. Ice Mountain Zone wanted to put that boss to shame though, and it is horrendous. This boss fight takes place completely underwater, which means your jumps are slower and less responsive. It also means you will eventually drown, which is a problem as both the boss and the air are higher than your jump. The drowning timer even starts ticking away during the cutscene, so you'll need air fast. The trick to this boss is to avoid chunks of ice that he drops on you, jump off of them, and either hit the boss or grab some air. The problem is that the ice spikes have huge hitboxes underneath them and no visual indicator of when it's safe to land upon. Also, as I said before, in the water you are slow to move, so if a group spawn together, you may not have enough time to jump off them and reach the surface. The ice doesn't spawn on your location either, so you might be doomed from the start. They can even spawn too far off the screen. Sonic just has a painful time here, but every other character can cheese this boss. Tails can swim to the surface, Amy can hammer vault up, and once you get to the surface as Knuckles, you never have to go back down. Considering most people probably just picked Sonic, I wouldn't be surprised if they ended their playthrough here. Angel Island finally gives us a decent boss battle against a robot Knuckles. Clearly, Eggman tried to fool our heroes, but once he starts throwing missiles, the gig is up. You can exploit this boss's AI to do repetitive moves, which will make it rather easy, but the setting and music makes up for it. Cosmic Angel has an interesting encounter. Eggman swings from side to side while shooting slow energy balls at you. To hit him, you need to jump with enough force next to him so that his vehicle flips over. Admittedly, the force needed seemed to be inconsistent. Sometimes I will do a big jump and get nothing, whilst the hop does the job. It wasn't too difficult, but Tails had the hardest time with it as his moveset was basically useless here. Oh, and Amy can just obliterate most of these bosses with her hammer drop.
It's my turn now!
Once you've gotten your selected character past the Cosmic Angel boss, you find yourselves in the final zone. Although it is basically a boss rush with a bit of a rest in between. The setting is great, very reminiscent of Sonic & Knuckles. As for the bosses, the first is a mock-up of the very first boss in the series. Our characters are more than capable for it, and the boss goes down in just 4 hits. We then get to challenge the first boss of Sonic 2, which can just as easily be destroyed. The third encounter is the true meat of the zone. Although Eggman's contraption looks odd, it is certainly effective. The dome is protected by a spinning weapon rack, meaning that for once, you cannot simply abuse your invincibility frames to beat it. Eggman will attack with one of 3 weapons, temporarily lowering his guard for you to counterattack. One of these weapons is a laser beam that gives you mere moments to avoid before firing. Another weapon is a cannon launcher. It can either be shot high or low, and you have no warning of which one it will be. If it goes high and you jump ready to hit Eggman, you will take damage every time. But if it goes low and you hadn't already jumped, he can protect himself before you hit him. Basically, you just have to jump every time and hope it works. His final weapon is a hand that hits hard. It can be used as a simple obstacle, but it can also try to grab your rings and has quite the reach. If you are caught by the grab, Eggman will shake all your rings out and throw you in a way where you will not likely get them back. This attack can be extremely annoying, as it will even wait for an opening, but it is in that strategy that we can exploit the boss. When he activates the hand, try to jump near his back whilst you attack. If you get hit, you'll stay behind the boss during your invincibility frames. During this, the boss is still exposed because the hand is waiting for you, so hit it as many times as you can before making sure you grab at least one ring. Following this strategy makes the boss a whole lot easier. Technically, the boss has a fourth weapon, changing the side of the map he is on. This is, no joke, one of the most annoying things he can do, as when he's on the left, it is much harder to keep your one ring when it bounces off screen. Once you do beat the boss, everything explodes and your hero gets to bask in their glory. Pretty quick ending, but there wasn't much of a story to pay off on anyway. As you may expect, there is more to the game's ending than meets the eye. Much like the classic games, Sonic Advance makes use of secret special stages that can reward Chaos Emeralds. If you manage to collect them all, there's one more boss battle waiting for you. In order to access the special stages, you will need to locate some rare blue springs. These act as your entry point and are scattered across some of the acts. These springs are one of the best examples of why the developers should have reassessed the scope of the game. If you were playing this for the first time, you won't have an idea of which acts have a spring or not. With a small Game Boy Advance screen, you may spend hours searching each stage. Exploration is not a bad thing inherently, but after playing this game all over again, I wouldn't call it a strong suit. If you do find one though, a whole new set of challenges await you. The admittedly cool looking special stages features your character snowboarding down a pipe where you must collect a certain amount of rings before a checkpoint, otherwise you fail. Sounds simple on paper, but the problem is these special stages try to emulate a 3D space, requiring tight controls on a very small screen. You can see rings and have enough time to reach them, but miss them anyway because it wasn't clear if you actually touched them or not. You may be thinking, okay, that isn't ideal, but you can just try again, right? Wrong. If you fail the special stage, you are kicked out and the spring becomes a regular one. This means you need to exit the stage, come back, find a spring, and try to collect the rings all over again. During the special stage, there is a Chao that if collected will give you a retry, but due to the depth perception issues, you'll probably never grab it. The ring limit to pass is also quite strict as well. Honestly, I don't have anything good to say about these special stages. They are the worst element of the game and take way too much effort to complete. I recommend you just do not bother past the first one of these. They are the type of thing you make, realise it was a mistake, and then definitely do not go on to repeat twice more in the future. But what happens if you did collect them all? Well, first, you have to beat the boss rush again, but once you do have all 7 emeralds in hand, Sonic will continue to pursue Eggman. And yeah, you heard me right, only Sonic. Other characters going super was pretty old school even in the 2000s. Shadow was lucky he got to transform as often as he did. Regardless, the extra zone takes you to the moon. This is a really stunning scene for a final confrontation, and you get to experience it as Super Sonic. The boss really just starts you in the frying pan though. You've never played as Super Sonic before, so you're already trying to learn him, when the boss starts blasting you. This Eggman boss is very impressive, clearly the most detailed sprite in the game. Unfortunately, this becomes a bit of a problem as it can become difficult to tell what you're hitting and if it's even making an impact. What the player is supposed to do is hit the head of the robot with a charge attack whilst breaking capsules for rings. Charging in the air can also avoid some of the large robot's attacks. The game makes no effort to inform or hint the player on anything, be that the boss mechanics or how Super Sonic works. This becomes even more offensive when you consider all the Chaos Emerald grinding you had to do just to get here, when you will likely game over on your first time. This really doesn't feel like a rewarding challenge. It feels like you got extra chores for finishing early. Ultimately, I don't rate this boss high at all. Everything to do with Chaos Emeralds in this game is just a huge waste of time. Your reward for beating the final boss is a different ending cutscene that takes some cues from Sonic 2, where Super Sonic looks at you. That is it. You spend all that time, all that pain, just to see Super Sonic look at you. Don't know about you, but that isn't the kind of reward I was looking for. There is no satisfying story resolution, no new character, no new mode, no nothing. A sad end to the experience. So, we've looked over all the game now, excluding the multiplayer modes. What are my thoughts? Well, Sonic Advance certainly has character. You can tell that this game was really trying to be a great experience. Top quality music, amazing sprites, and a decent amount of content to enjoy. It may have overshot in a few places, and later levels start relying too much on cheap level design, but the soul of the game remains intact. So long as you don't bother with collecting all the Chaos Emeralds. That whole endgame experience can really sour everything else you had done. Overall, I would still recommend you play the game for yourself, even if it's just as one character. When you consider the time it was released, in which portable gaming was limited, it is easy to see why this game kicked off a series of Game Boy Advance spin-offs in the years that followed its release. And that is all there is to say about Sonic Advance. A great start to the Adventure era's handheld exploits. This review became a whole lot longer than I originally planned, but I didn't want to cut corners with it. Please let me know your thoughts on how this was presented in the comments below. I know most people probably will not get this far, but thank you for sticking through it. I hope this review was of some use to you. Have a great day, and I hope to see you next time. This is the Mighty Emperor, signing off.